In the years before 1868, Denver had settled into an unusual quiet. The gold rush frenzy had faded, the hard cases had drifted on, and life in the West briefly felt tame. But when the railroads pushed through, they carried with them a flood of gamblers, thieves, fugitives, and violent men driven out of places like Cheyenne and Laramie by newly formed vigilance committees. Many of those outlaws slipped south into Colorado, bringing with them a darker, more dangerous edge that young frontier towns weren't ready for. Into this atmosphere rode L.H. Musgrove, Edward Franklin, and Sanford Duggan. By the summer of 1868, Musgrove's gang had established a hidden camp at Bonner Springs, using it as a base to raid across northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. Government horses disappeared, cattle vanished, and crimes blamed on native groups were often their handiwork instead. Denver's brief calm was over. Musgrove and his men had ushered in a storm. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and welcome to Wild West Deep Dives. L.H. Musgrove didn't drift into the outlaw life, the way many men did on the frontier. According to sources, he arrived in Colorado already carrying the reputation of a marked villain. Every description of him emphasizes the same traits: a tall, powerfully built man with a piercing gaze, unnervingly calm under pressure, and a natural authority that made other men fall in line. Even those who despised him admitted he had a presence of a born commander, someone who planned with precision, acted without hesitation, and expected his orders to be obeyed. Musgrove was a Southern man by birth, raised near Como Depot, Mississippi, and like thousands of others, he was swept westward during the California Gold Rush. He landed in Napa Valley, but trouble followed him almost immediately. His Southern sympathies ran deep, and when he quarreled with a local man over the Civil War, Musgrove settled the argument by shooting the man dead. That killing forced him out of California, pushing him into Nevada, where he reportedly killed 2 more men before being driven out yet again. Whether every one of these killings occurred exactly as later recounted is impossible to verify, but the consistencies of the stories and the fear attached to his name suggests a pattern that began long before he reached Colorado. The next phase of his life placed him near Old Fort Halleck in southern Wyoming, where he worked for a time as an Indian trader, but even there, his temper and his absolute intolerance for insult surfaced. When a half-breed man jokingly called him a liar, Musgrove didn't shout, he didn't posture. He simply drew his revolver, aimed deliberately, and put a bullet clean through the man's forehead. This killing ended his time on the Laramie Plains, but it also tells of the coldness Musgrove had. He did not threaten, he acted. From this point of his life, the story takes 2 different paths depending on which tradition you believe. Some accounts say Musgrove was already a practiced criminal by the time he crossed the mountains and reached Denver, but a later story, told by men who claim to have ridden with him, paints a different motivation. According to them, Musgrove once owned a train of freight wagons and ventured through the Laramie region. Government officials searched his goods, found undeclared whiskey, confiscated his entire outfit, and threw him into the guardhouse. There, he was made to scrub floors, clean spittoons, and perform every humiliating task soldiers could devise. When he finally escaped from the fort, he swore he would repay the government for every insult. And from that moment forward, he focused his energies on stealing government horses, mules, and property whenever the chance arose. Whether revenge truly sparked his outlaw career, or whether it merely justified a life he was already living, is impossible to say. But by the time Musgrove reached Colorado in the late 1860s, one thing was certain. He had become a man feared across the frontier, a horse thief, a highwayman, a killer, and a leader whose shadow would soon darken the region. Musgrove organized a band of horse thieves that would grow into one of the most formidable outlaw outfits on the Western Plains. Musgrove was a natural organizer. His operations stretched across Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, New Mexico, and Texas. Wherever stock could be stolen in one territory and sold 100 miles away in another, he found a way to make it profitable. Entire droves of horses vanished overnight. Government mules disappeared regularly. The gang would sell one herd in a distant town, steal another in the same region, then drive that new herd right back to the place where they had stolen the first. It It was a rotating machine of theft that frontier law could scarcely keep up with. By the mid-1860s, their work was bold enough to draw military attention. 50 cattle vanished from Fort Steele in 1864, followed quickly by every cavalry horse on the post. At first, the soldiers blamed Indians. That was the reflex explanation in those days, but the truth, as later admitted, pointed squarely at Musgrove's gain. The Outlaws even slid open the quartermaster's tent one night, hauled out the fort safe, rolled it into a gulch, blew it apart, and made off with nearly $2,000, just over $41,000 today. This was no Indian raid, it was organized banditry, and by the summer of 1868, with their headquarters dug into the rock fortress at a place called Bonner Springs near Livermore, Colorado, the gang was firmly entrenched and operating freely across northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. Among Musgrove's men, none had a fiercer reputation than Edward Heartless Franklin. He was younger than Musgrove, but cut from the same cloth, fearless, stubborn, and utterly unwilling to surrender. His legend comes mostly from the mule theft at Fort Saunders, when he drove government stock several miles onto the plains before 17 soldiers finally ran him down. Most men would have thrown up their hands at that point, but Franklin wasn't most men. He scraped together a makeshift breastwork of sand, dropped behind it, and held off the entire detachment for more than an hour. The soldiers poured round after round into his position. He fired back as fast as he could load. Only when a bullet struck him in the chest did he fall silent. After being captured and taken back to the fort, he recovered quickly, regained his strength, and escaped. This was the man who pledged loyalty to Musgrove, and Musgrove to him. Their bond was so tight that they swore to come for one another in any moment of danger. But even the most formidable gains are vulnerable to the smallest cracks, especially when greed and overconfidence start to dull a leader's instincts. And in Musgrove's case, the crack came in the form of a Pleasant Valley rancher named Abner Loomis. Loomis wasn't the kind of man most outlaws chose to cross. Old-timers remembered him as quiet, steady, and absolutely fearless, the sort of man a bully avoided without being told why. He had been selling vegetables that Musgrove's gained from his farm along the Cache Lapooter, and he struck a simple bargain with them. Nothing was to be taken from Pleasant Valley settlers. If Musgrove or any of his men ever stole so much as a halter from the ranchers in that valley, Loomis promised he would personally organize a posse and hang Musgrove himself. Whether the gang kept their word out of respect or out of fear is unclear, but they never stole from the valley. Everything changed when the reward for Musgrove's capture went up. Now I couldn't find exactly how much it was, sources just said a large sum. But Loomis, who had once tolerated the outlaw so long as his neighbors were safe, decided the time had come to end the gang's reign. In the fall of 1868, he rode north towards Bonner Springs, alone and unarmed, relying entirely on the trust he had built by supplying the camp. The gang recognized him and let him enter. Loomis spun a simple story. A fine horse had strayed from Musgrove's herd, and he knew exactly where it could be found. The outlaw leader, convinced that Loomis had become something like an ally, saddled up and rode with him. On the way back, Loomis invited Musgrove to stop at his Pleasant Valley home for supper. The outlaw accepted without suspicion. They sat down at the table, sharing a quiet meal, when Denver Marshal Haskell suddenly stepped out from hiding and leveled a gun at Musgrove. The desperado had no time to draw. There was nothing he could do. Loomis's trap had sprung shut. Musgrove surrendered, was shackled on the spot, and carried to Denver, double-crossed by a man he had long believed he could trust. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you everything, right? What you just heard was from the History of Larimer County by Hansel Watrous, and I did find some truth to it. There was a Denver Marshal Haskell, for 100% fact, in 1885. Could he be the same guy? I couldn't find anything concrete, but other accounts tell differently of how Musgrove was captured. According to the book, Hands Up, or 35 Years of Detective Life in the Mountains and on the Plains, by authors David J. and John W. Cook, it doesn't mention much about his capture and arrest, other than it was some good old-fashioned detective work. Then there is another account by the Frontier Index in an article titled Capture of Musgrove, the Renegade White Indian, on the 17th of December, 1868, that says on the 25th of October, 1868, 16 members of Musgrove's gang, disguised as Native Americans, attacked a train near Elk Mountain, Wyoming. stole some mules, and killed 4 men, scalping 2 of them. And that a few days later, on the 28th of October, a local Wyoming man named John Cronin chased Musgrove and captured him and took him to Fort Steele to be tried. To be completely honest with you, I couldn't find how exactly, without a shadow of the doubt, Musgrove was captured. Welcome to history. The only for sure fact I could find is that he was captured and he was sent to Denver, and that his arrival couldn't have come at a worse time. The city had recently turned its full attention to clearing out the criminal element that had drifted in with the railroads, and Musgrove, once the most feared outlaw in the region, was now a prize the entire territory had been waiting for. General David James Cook, who was both Denver's city marshal and the head of the Rocky Mountain Detective Association, quickly learned that nearly 20 of Musgrove's men were drifting into the city. They hadn't come to visit, they had come to break their leader out. Cook couldn't arrest them without proof, so he waited, knowing they would soon reveal themselves. At the front of the rescue party rode Franklin, and beside him was a man whose name often appears alongside theirs, though he may have never even been a formal member of the gang, Sanford S.C. Duggan. Dugen didn't need a gang to make him dangerous. He had come west from Pennsylvania as a teenager, and, almost immediately, drowned himself in the roughest company he could find. At 18, he shot a man named Curtis in Blackhawk, about 40 miles west of Denver, and spent only a short time in jail before he escaped. In Denver, he attached himself to a prostitute, Kitty Wells, living off her earnings until they quarreled and he nearly beat her to death with a pistol. Again, he escaped justice and fled to the Black Hills in Dakota Territory. In the Black Hills, he was implicated in yet another murder and fled to Laramie, where he acted as if he was city marshal, until the citizens discovered what he really was and gave him a few hours to leave town or be removed by force. That was Duggan's resume by the time he crossed paths with Franklin on the trail to Denver. Whether or not he was truly part of Musgrove's organization hardly mattered. Duggan shared the same appetite for violence, the same disregard for consequence, and the same willingness to attach himself to anyone who promised excitement. When Franklin answered Musgrove's call, Duggan went with him, 2 seasoned desperados heading straight into Denver with the intention of rescuing the most hunted outlaw in the region. And they didn't come quietly, they came looking for trouble, and found it. Though Franklin and Duggan had ridden toward Denver with a single purpose, freeing their captured leader, they knew better than to ride boldly into town. Duggan was already well known to Marshal Cook and his officers, so the pair stopped along Clear Creek and waited for night to fall. Darkness was safer, but it also offered temptation. As they slipped into the city, the rescue mission took a back seat to their old habits. The 2 outlaws drifted down Blake Street, looking for easy money. Their first victim, James Torrance, surrendered $22. The next man, Alex Delap, wisely carried nothing of value. From there, the pair turned onto Lawrence Street and spotted a lone figure heading home, Justice of the Peace, Orson Brooks. Brooks had presided over Duggan's case years earlier in the beating of Kitty Wells, though Franklin and Duggan didn't recognize him. They followed him toward the deserted stretch near the old Grand Central Hotel and held him up at gunpoint. Brooks offered no resistance as they took $135 from his pockets. But when he made the mistake of hinting he recognized one of them, Duggan turned to Franklin with a chilling suggestion. "Let's plant the old snoozer. What do you say?" Brooks managed to laugh it off, convincing them they were mistaken, and after a storm of curses, the 2 thieves let him go. But the damage was done. Robbing a magistrate, one of Denver's most respected citizens, lit a fire under the entire city. The public wanted justice, and they wanted it fast. The case fell naturally to Marshal Dave Cook and his newly formed Rocky Mountain Detective Association. Cook had almost nothing to work with, except a single clue. Judge Brooks remembered that one of his bills stolen from him was a $20 note that had been torn and patched with a scrap of official paper, said to be from his office. Cook sent word to every officer in Denver and the surrounding towns to watch for it. A few days later, on a Sunday, a messenger from Sheriff John Keith of Jefferson County arrived with news that the men Cook wanted had surfaced in Golden, drunk, swaggering, and throwing their weight around the streets. One of them had just tried to spend a torn and mended $20 bill. Cook and his posse rode hard for Golden, reaching the outskirts around 9 that night. They learned that Franklin was passed out drunk at the Overland House, and that Duggan was very much awake inside Dan Hill's saloon. The plan was to take Duggan first. But as the officers moved toward the building, they overheard 2 figures crossing a vacant lot. One man told the other,
"What do these sons of bitches officers wants? That's Dave Cook from Denver. I left one of my pistols at your saloon."
Sheriff Keith recognized the voices, Duggan and Miles Hill, the saloon keeper's brother. Cook's men split, approaching the saloon from front and rear as Sheriff Keith told the men, in case there should be shooting, boys, do not hit Miles Hill. The building was dark, but the faint glow of a cigar revealed a figure by the back door. As Miles Hill stepped out from the saloon returning the pistol that belonged to Duggan, Duggan spotted the officers and fired first, the bullet ripping a patch from Cook's overcoat. The officers answered immediately. In the muzzle flash, they saw Duggan bolt into the night, vaulting a fence and disappearing into the brush, escaping yet again. A man lay dying in the dirt and smoke. It was Miles Hill, fatally struck by the return fire. He died within hours and was heavily mourned by Golden citizens. Hill had been no criminal. His only mistake was standing too close to a desperado he shouldn't have trusted. With Duggan escaped, Cook turned his attention to Franklin. The officers moved quickly to the Overland House. The proprietor pointed them toward Franklin's room, and Cook led the way inside without knocking. Despite having passed out earlier, Franklin had arranged everything for a fight. A loaded revolver under his pillow, empty scabbard hanging nearby, boots placed for fast movement. When a light fell across his face, he rolled over with a groan. Cook laid a firm hand on his arm and said, "Franklin, we want you." Franklin came awake like a man yanked from a nightmare. One moment he was sprawled across the bed in a drunken sleep. The next his eyes snapped open, sharp and furious, the candlelight glinting off the sweat on his brow.
"The hell you do?"
he snarled, twisting beneath the marshal's grip. Cook kept his voice steady, low, controlled, the tone of a man who had been in the situation far too many times.
"Yes, come on quietly,"
he said. There was no chance of that.
"Quietly be damned. Where's my gun? No damned officer from Denver can arrest me. I'm not that sort of stuff. You can make up your mind to that."
Franklin was already gathering himself, muscles bulging, breathing heavily. Even half drunk and wounded from his old gunshot scar, he was a powerful man and a desperate one at that. As Cook and Smith tried to restrain him, Franklin's hand suddenly shot toward the pillow where he was keeping the revolver. One of the officers saw the movement and struck him hard across the head with the barrel of his own pistol. The blow staggered Franklin, but did nothing to tame him. Blood streamed down the side of his face, and the pain only seemed to ignite something feral inside of him. He roared and surged to his knees on the mattress. His shirt tore open as he thrashed, and his old wound near his breast was visible, an angry red scar from the day he held off 17 soldiers alone.
"Come on, all of you,"
as he rose to his feet.
"I suppose you can kill me, but you cannot arrest me. I will not go with you. If you want to shoot, put it there,
as he slapped his hand across his chest. He lunged again, sweeping his arm toward the small table beside the bed, toward the cocked revolver Cook had placed there earlier. The officers saw the movement, the unmistakable shift in his weight, the deadly intent in his eyes. There was no more room for negotiations. Cook reacted first. With a calm precision that had made him famous, he raised his revolver in his left hand and fired. A split second later, Frank Smith's pistol barked beside him. Both bullets hit Franklin square in the chest, so close together they might as well have been one shot. The outlaw's breath caught, his body jerked once, the fire in his eyes went out. He toppled backward onto the blood-soaked bed, collapsing in the same sheets he had thrashed against moments earlier. He did not speak, he did not curse, he did not reach for his gun again. Edward Heartless Franklin was dead before his body settled on the mattress. Outside, Golden erupted into a night of panic and wild rumor. People ran through the streets convinced a mob had taken over the town, or that a dozen men had been killed. By morning, the facts were known. One good man, Miles Hill, dead by accident. One outlaw, Franklin, killed resisting arrest. One desperado, Duggan, vanished into the night. Cook paid the Overland House $50 for the ruined bed and prepared to return to Denver. Before leaving, he and his men scoured the countryside for Duggan, but the outlaw had wasted no time. With few settlements on the plains or in the foothills, there was little chance of catching a man so familiar with running. Cook issued alerts to his detective network and headed back to the Queen City to face the next storm. By the time Cook and his men rode back from Golden, the night was nearly gone. They were exhausted, stiff from the hard ride, and they slept late into Monday morning. When they finally stepped out into the streets of Denver, they found a different city than the one they had left. News travels fast in a frontier town, especially when it smells blood. Word of the fight in Golden, of Miles Hill lying dead and Ed Franklin shot down like a mad animal in a hotel room, had swept through the Queen City. For the first time, many citizens truly understood what sort of men had been moving quietly through their streets. These weren't just stage robbers and stock thieves. They were men who would stand off soldiers, shoot peace officers, and think nothing of taking lives. More and more people began to connect Franklin's name with Musgrove's. Rumors spread that Franklin had gone straight to jail after the Friday night robberies and held a quiet conference with his chief. Not long afterward, Musgrove had openly bragged that his escape was already arranged, that his men would soon take him out of jail, and that there wasn't a thing the authorities could do about it. Add to that the knowledge that as many as 20 outlaws had slipped into Denver after Musgrove's arrest, and the town's mood turned from unease to cold anger. The legal system was weak, juries were hard to sway, prisons were easy to break, and technicalities had let more than one killer walk free. If Musgrove escaped now, after all the trouble it had taken to capture him, there might not be a second chance. In the eyes of many, the community was sick, and only a drastic cure would save it. By midday on the 23rd of November, Denver's quiet talk of lynching Musgroves exploded into open resolve, spreading through the city like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, hundreds of citizens, from lawyers and doctors to merchants and ministers, converged on Larimer Street and marched toward the jail in broad daylight, fully aware of what they intended to do. With no officers willing to intervene, Denver's, quote, best men moved as one toward carrying out the people's verdict. In front of the jail, someone climbed up to where he could be seen and heard. The crowd fell silent. A simple question was put to them: shall Musgrove be taken from the jail? The answer rolled back in a solid wall of sound: yes. Then a second question: shall he be hanged when he is taken out? Again, the same unbroken response. No one spoke in his defense. As far as the town was concerned, the verdict had been rendered. Inside the jail, Musgrove had heard every word. He knew exactly why the crowd had come. When the first man stepped into the corridor, he met them standing, armed with a chunk of pine or a billet of wood someone had slipped him. He swung it in the air, daring anyone to come close. No one was very eager to be the first through the door at the wrong moment. Just then, a few shots cracked in the narrow passageway, fired high to rattle him and force him down. Realizing they meant to take him alive, not shoot him in the cell, Musgrove finally agreed to surrender on the condition that they didn't gun him down where he stood. The bargain was accepted. They bound him and led him out to the street. The crowd surged around him as the procession moved toward the Larimer Street Bridge over Cherry Creek. Musgrove was pushed along, walking with heavy, sullen stride, his eyes sweeping the faces lining the way as if hoping to spot one of his gang, some sign that the rescue he had bragged about might yet appear. But none did. When they reached the middle of the bridge, he seemed to understand at last there would be no help, no last-minute charge from the gang. Still, he never begged. There was no plea for mercy. What he did ask for was paper and a pencil.
If you are bent on murdering me, he told them, you'll at least be men enough to let me write to my friends.
No one objected. They stopped in the middle of the span, and Musgrove leaned over the railing to scribble out his final words. He wrote one note to a brother back in Como Depot, Mississippi, and another to his wife Mary in Cheyenne. The spelling was rough, the handwriting poor, but the meaning was plain. He said he was to be hanged by a mob on false charges, that he was innocent of what they accused him of, that his children were in Napa Valley and needed care, that God knew the truth, and that this would be his last goodbye. If you'll allow me, I'm going to read the note to his wife. My dear wife, before this reaches you, I will be no more. Mary, I am, as you know, innocent of the charges made against me. I do not know what they are going to hang me for, unless it is because I am acquainted with Ed Franklin. God will protect you, I hope. Goodbye forever, as ever yours. Sell what I have to keep it. L.H. Musgrove. While he wrote, some of the men quietly tied his legs together. A wagon appeared, and he was ordered to climb into the bed. Musgrove put his hands on the seat and vaulted up in a single cat-like motion. The wagon rolled off the bridge and down into the dry bed of Cherry Creek. From the timbers above dangled a rope with a noose already tied, swinging slightly in the breeze. The driver, George Hopkins, eased the wagon into position beneath it. Musgrove was told he could take whatever time he needed to prepare himself. His answer was short, almost bored.
Go on with your work.
They made him stand on the seat while they slipped the noose around his neck. Above, on the bridge, Captain Scudder tried to address the crowd about the illegality of what they were doing. If Musgrove heard him, he gave no sign. Instead, he calmly fished a scrap of cigarette paper from one vest pocket and a pinch of tobacco from the other. With his hands free for the moment, he rolled himself a cigarette, pinched the ends, asked the driver for a match, and lit it. Witnesses later said he smoked with as much composure as a man sitting in a sunny plaza, not one standing on a wagon beneath his own noose. The crowd grew restless. Someone shouted for the driver to move on. Someone called out, asking where the rest of his gang was.
I'm sure I don't know,
Musgrove shot back.
unless you're one of them.
His hat was pulled down over his eyes. The rope was drawn snug. When the wagon jolted forward, Musgrove didn't wait. He threw away the cigarette and jumped, trying to end it quickly. But the wagon hadn't cleared him yet, and he came down hard on the floorboards with a curse and an expression of disgust, as if annoyed that even his own death refused to go smoothly. He gathered himself and leaped again, this time with the wagon just far enough ahead that there was nothing beneath him when he dropped. His full weight hit the rope, breaking his neck. His body shuddered once or twice, then hung still. When someone finally pushed his hat back, his face looked much as it had in life. Heavy-jawed, sullen, defiant, with not much trace of fear. Denver papers would later insist that those who gathered on the bridge that day were not a lawless mob, but the people themselves. The best men the city had, acting because the law had failed them. Whether this was justice or just another crime dressed up in respectable clothes is something every listener will have to decide for themselves. What's certain is this. On the 23rd of November, 1868, the citizens of Denver decided that L.H. Musgrove's story would end not in a courtroom, but swinging beneath the Larimer Street bridge over Cherry Creek. Before we end this episode, what happened to Sanford Duggan? Well, after his capture near Cheyenne, Sanford Duggan was brought back to Denver, where citizens were already eager to deliver the same frontier justice that had ended Musgrove. Despite attempts by officers to hide his arrival, mobs gathered, and days later, a group of armed vigilantes intercepted his transfer wagon at night, dragged him to a cottonwood tree near Cherry Creek, and hanged the sobbing 23-year-old after he pleaded for mercy. With Duggan's death, the Musgrove gang vanished into history. The story of L.H. Musgrove and his gang is one of those rare moments in frontier history where myth, violence, and raw community instinct collide. For nearly 2 years, Musgrove, Franklin, and Duggan moved like shadows across Colorado and Wyoming, stealing herds, outwitting soldiers, and slipping through every weak seam in the law. Their crimes were bold, sometimes brilliant, and often brutal. Yet what ultimately brought them down wasn't a posse on the plains, but the anger of ordinary citizens pushed too far. Musgrove's lynching beneath the Larimer Street bridge, Franklin's violent death in a hotel room, and Duggan's final, desperate pleas under a cottonwood tree mark one of the most dramatic purges in early Denver's history. Right or wrong, legal or not, the people decided that the courts could no longer protect them, and the frontier delivered its own verdict. The Musgrove gang vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared, a storm that blew in with the railroads and was swept away by the same wild, imperfect justice that shaped so much of the Old West. In the end, Musgrove died defiant, Franklin died fighting, and Duggan died begging. And Denver, shaken, frightened, and determined, sent a message that echoed across the plains. The city was no longer a haven for outlaws. I hope you all enjoyed this episode on the Musgrove gang. If you did, please leave a like and maybe subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't be afraid to hit the follow button and give me a rating. It really does help this podcast grow, and I appreciate all of your support. It helps me more than you know. Join the membership family. For just $1, you'll get access to bonus content like the Honeywell gunfight. I'm going to start working on the next multi-part deep dive soon, so content may not come out weekly, but I will try the best I can. Again, I appreciate everyone's support. Y'all are amazing. We'll see y'all next time, and remember, when in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.